Remember when your dad could buy a house, support a family of 5, and save for retirement, all on one factory wage? When a high school diploma was enough to land a job with a pension? When the future wasn't a question mark, but a promise? Want to go back to when the economy actually worked for working people? The 1960s were the golden age of the Canadian economy, not just good, the absolute peak of what an economy could do for ordinary people. This was the post-war boom in full swing, and it created a level of prosperity, security, and opportunity that hasn't been matched since. This wasn't trickle-down economics or gig economy hustle. This was real, broad-based prosperity. Your dad could graduate high school, get hired at the plant or the railway or the mill, work there for 40 years, and retire with a pension that would carry him through. Your mom could stay home if she wanted to, not because of ideology, but because the economics allowed it. Houses were affordable, genuinely affordable. A working man could buy a 3-bedroom bungalow on a single income and have it paid off in 15 or 20 years. The mortgage payment was manageable. There was money left over for groceries, clothes, maybe a vacation to the cottage or a road trip out west. Jobs were plentiful. Manufacturing was booming. Infrastructure was being built. The economy was growing at rates we can barely imagine today. Unemployment was low. Wages were rising. Benefits were standard. Pensions were guaranteed. The social contract between employers and workers actually meant something. But it wasn't just the numbers. It was the feeling, the sense that tomorrow would be better than today, that your kids would have it better than you did, that hard work would pay off, that the system was fair, or at least fair enough. That being Canadian meant having a shot at a good life. The 60s economy created the Canadian middle class as we know it. It built the suburbs. It filled the driveways with cars. It sent kids to university who were the first in their families to go. It created a level of security and stability that shaped an entire generation's worldview. In this video, we're going to walk through what made the 1960s Canadian economy so special. The jobs that paid real wages, the houses that were actually affordable, the benefits and pensions that were standard, the optimism that came from living in an economy that worked. Some of this will make you nostalgic. Some of it will make you angry at what we've lost. And all of it will remind you that things can be different. Before we dive in, hit that like button and subscribe. We've got a lot of economic history to cover, and trust me, every point matters. Let's go back to when the economy worked. Point 1. Jobs that paid real wages. The foundation of the 60s boom was simple: jobs that paid enough to live on, not survive, live. Manufacturing was the backbone. Auto plants in Oshawa and Windsor, steel mills in Hamilton, aerospace in Montreal, pulp and paper mills across the country. These weren't minimum wage jobs. These were union jobs with real wages, benefits, and security. A factory worker in the 60s could make $5,000 to $7,000 a year. That doesn't sound like much, but adjusted for what things actually cost, it was enough. Enough to buy a house, enough to support a family, enough to save for retirement, enough to live with dignity. The railways employed tens of thousands. CP Rail, CN Rail, these were massive employers offering stable, well-paying jobs. Brakemen, engineers, conductors, maintenance workers, all unionized, all with benefits, all with pensions. Construction was booming. The suburbs were being built. Highways were being constructed. Infrastructure projects were everywhere. If you could swing a hammer or operate equipment, you could find work. And it paid well. Mining and resource extraction were major employers, especially in Northern Ontario, BC, and the prairies. Hard, dangerous work, but it paid accordingly. And the unions ensured workers had protections, benefits, and fair treatment. Even retail and service jobs paid better relative to cost of living. Working at Eaton's or Simpson's wasn't glamorous, but it was steady work with benefits. You could support yourself, maybe even a small family, on a retail wage. The key was that wages kept pace with productivity and cost of living. When companies made more money, workers shared in that prosperity. When prices went up, wages went up. The system had balance, and jobs came with benefits. health insurance, dental, pensions, paid vacation. These weren't perks for executives, they were standard for union workers. The social safety net was being built, and it was working. Point 2. Houses you could actually afford. The 60s were the last decade when housing was genuinely affordable for working people. The average house price in Canada in 1960 was around $12,000 to $15,000. In Toronto, maybe $14,000. In Vancouver, $13,000. In smaller cities, $10,000 or less. These weren't shacks. These were proper 3-bedroom bungalows with yards. The average annual wage was $4,000 to $5,000. That meant a house cost roughly 3 times your annual income. 3 times. You could save for a down payment in a couple of years. You could get a mortgage and have it paid off in 15 or 20 years without breaking your back. Compare that to today, where houses cost 10, 12, 15 times the average annual income. The math doesn't even come close. The 60s were the last time housing was truly accessible to working people. Mortgages were straightforward. You'd put down 10% to 20%, get a mortgage at 6% to 8% interest, and pay it off over 20 years. The monthly payment might be $80 to $100. That was manageable on a factory wage. The suburbs were being built specifically for working families. Levittown-style developments, rows of similar houses, affordable, functional, and available. Developers understood that their market was working people, so they built accordingly. Government policy supported home ownership. CMHC mortgages made it easier to buy. Tax policies favored homeowners. The message was clear. Home ownership was the foundation of middle-class life, and the government would help you achieve it. This created generational wealth. Your parents bought a house for $15,000. They paid it off. It appreciated. They could pass it down or sell it and retire comfortably. Home ownership was the path to security, and it was accessible. Today's housing crisis isn't inevitable, it's a policy choice. The 60s proved that housing can be affordable if we want it to be. Point 3. Benefits and pensions were standard. The 60s were when the social safety net was built, and it fundamentally changed what it meant to be a worker. Pensions were standard for union jobs. Defined benefit pensions, you work for 30 or 40 years, you retire with a pension that pays a percentage of your salary for life. You knew exactly what you'd get. You could plan your retirement with confidence. These weren't 401ks or RRSPs where you're gambling on the market. These were guaranteed pensions funded by employers and protected by unions. You did your time, you got your pension. Simple. Health benefits were becoming standard. Dental, vision, prescription drugs, covered by your employer. You didn't have to choose between seeing a doctor and paying rent. Healthcare was a right, not a luxury. Universal healthcare was being implemented across Canada through the 60s. Saskatchewan led the way in 1962. By the end of the decade, most provinces had some form of public health care. This was revolutionary. You could get sick without going bankrupt. Paid vacation was standard. 2 weeks, sometimes 3 for senior workers. You could actually take time off, go to the cottage, take a road trip, and not worry about losing your job or your income. Job security was real. Unions protected workers from arbitrary firing. Seniority mattered. If you did your job, you kept your job. The constant anxiety of modern employment, will I have a job next month, didn't exist for most workers. Unemployment insurance was robust. If you lost your job, you had support while you found another one. It wasn't generous, but it was enough to keep you afloat. This social safety net created security. You could plan your life. You could take risks. You could start a family knowing you had support if things went wrong. That security shaped how an entire generation approached life. Point 4. Education was accessible. The 60s were when higher education became accessible to working-class kids, fundamentally changing social mobility. University tuition was affordable. In the early 60s, tuition at the University of Toronto was around $400 a year, total. Not per course, not per semester, per year. Books might cost another $100. Room and board, if you lived on campus, was maybe $800 for the year. You could work a summer job and pay for your entire year of university. Construction, factory work, retail. A summer of work would cover tuition, books, and living expenses. You could graduate debt-free. This opened university to working-class kids who were the first in their families to go. Your dad worked at the plant, but you could go to university, get a degree, and move into professional work. Social mobility was real. Community colleges were being established across Canada: George Brown, Seneca, Humber in Ontario, BCIT in BC, SAIT in Alberta. These provided practical training for trades and technical work, affordable, accessible, and directly connected to employment. Apprenticeships were common and well-structured. You could learn a trade, electrician, plumber, machinist, through a formal apprenticeship program. You'd earn while you learned, and you'd come out with skills that guaranteed employment. The expansion of education was a policy priority. Governments invested in universities, colleges, and technical schools. They understood that education was the foundation of economic growth and social mobility. This created a more educated workforce, which drove innovation and productivity. It also created opportunities for kids from working-class backgrounds to move up economically. The 60s were when the doors opened. Point 5. Infrastructure investment. The 60s were a decade of massive infrastructure investment that created jobs and built the Canada we know today. The Trans-Canada Highway was completed in 1962, connecting the country from coast to coast. This wasn't just a road. It was a statement that Canada was united, accessible, and modern. The St. Lawrence Seaway, completed in 1959, was still driving economic growth through the 60s. It opened the Great Lakes to ocean-going ships, transforming trade and commerce. Subways were being built. Toronto opened its first subway line in 1954 and expanded through the 60s. Montreal opened its metro in 1966, just in time for Expo 67. These were massive public works projects that employed thousands. Airports were being modernized. Toronto Pearson, Montreal Dorval, Vancouver International, all were expanded and upgraded to handle the jet age. Air travel was becoming accessible to middle-class Canadians. Hydro projects were being built across the country, massive dams in British Columbia, Quebec, and Manitoba. These provided cheap, reliable electricity that powered industrial growth and improved quality of life. Schools, hospitals, and public buildings were being constructed everywhere. The baby boom meant more kids, which meant more schools. Universal health care meant more hospitals. The public sector was expanding to meet growing needs. This infrastructure investment created jobs, good, well-paying construction jobs. It also created the foundation for future economic growth. The highways, subways, airports, and power plants built in the 60s are still serving us today. And it was all publicly funded. Governments understood that infrastructure was a public good that required public investment. They didn't wait for private sector solutions, they built what was needed. Point 6. Optimism and confidence. Perhaps the most important aspect of the 60s economy was the feeling it created: optimism, confidence, and belief in the future. People genuinely believed tomorrow would be better than today. The economy was growing, wages were rising, opportunities were expanding. The future looked bright, and that optimism shaped everything. Parents believed their kids would have it better than they did, and they were right. Kids who grew up in working-class homes could go to university, get professional jobs, and move up economically. Social mobility was real and visible. This optimism drove consumer spending. People bought houses, cars, appliances, furniture. They weren't worried about the future, so they invested in the present. This spending drove economic growth, which created more jobs, which drove more spending. A virtuous cycle. It also drove innovation and entrepreneurship. People started businesses because they believed they could succeed. The economy was growing, customers had money to spend, and the future looked promising. The 60s were when Canada came into its own as a nation. We got our flag in 1965. We celebrated our centennial in 1967 with Expo 67. We had universal health care, we were building infrastructure, we were confident, optimistic, and proud. This wasn't naive optimism. It was based on real economic progress, real improvements in living standards, and real opportunities. The numbers backed up the feeling, and that optimism shaped an entire generation's worldview. If you grew up in the 60s, you learned that the economy could work for ordinary people, that hard work would pay off, that the future was something to look forward to. That belief stayed with you, even as the economy changed. Point 7. What happened? So what happened? How did we go from the prosperity of the 60s to the precarity of today? The oil crisis of the 70s was the first shock. Energy prices spiked, inflation soared, and the post-war boom ended. The economic certainties of the 60s were suddenly uncertain. Globalization changed everything. Manufacturing moved overseas where labor was cheaper. The factories that employed thousands closed. The good union jobs disappeared. The economic foundation of the middle class eroded. Unions were weakened through policy and corporate opposition. Right-to-work laws, union busting, and the decline of manufacturing all reduced union membership and power. Without unions, workers lost bargaining power and wages stagnated. Government policy shifted. The Keynesian consensus that built the 60s prosperity was replaced by neoliberal policies that prioritized markets over people. Taxes were cut, regulations were reduced, and the social safety net was weakened. Housing became an investment vehicle rather than a place to live. Speculation, foreign investment, and policy choices that favored investors over residents drove prices beyond the reach of working people. Education became expensive. Tuition rose far faster than inflation. Student debt became normal. The accessibility of the 60s was replaced by the debt burden of today. The social contract between employers and workers broke down. Pensions were replaced by RRSPs. Benefits were cut. Job security disappeared. The gig economy replaced stable employment. The result is the economy we have today, one that works for the wealthy but leaves working people behind. The prosperity of the 60s wasn't inevitable, and neither is today's inequality. Both are the result of policy choices. The feeling. Close your eyes one more time. It's 1965. Your dad comes home from his shift at the plant. The mortgage payment is manageable. There's money in the savings account. Your mom is planning a vacation to the cottage, and nobody's worried about tomorrow because tomorrow looks pretty good. The 1960s Canadian economy was the healthiest our country has ever seen. Not because GDP was high or the stock market was booming, but because it worked for ordinary people, because a factory worker could buy a house, because education was accessible, because pensions were guaranteed, because the future was bright. We've lost that. The economy today works for the wealthy while working people struggle. Housing is unaffordable. Education is expensive. Pensions are rare. Job security is gone. The optimism of the 60s has been replaced by anxiety about the future. But the 60s prove it doesn't have to be this way. We built an economy that worked for everyone once. We can do it again. It requires policy choices that prioritize people over profits, workers over shareholders, and the common good over individual wealth. What do you remember about the 60s economy? Your dad's job? The house your parents bought? The security your family had? Share it in the comments. Let's remember what we had and fight to get it back. If this video made you think about what we've lost, hit that like button and subscribe. Share it with someone who remembers when the economy worked. Thanks for watching. And remember, the past isn't just nostalgia. It's proof that things can be better.